We're live. Nic McKinley, welcome to the future of fitness, my man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Appreciate
well, a couple things. Always a pleasure to sit down in Whitefish and sit with someone local and talk about really interesting, cool, important things that you guys are doing here. I mean, there's many layers to the conversation we're going to have today, from GoPills, which I just popped a couple. We'll see what happens over the next 30 minutes.
So if you start having seizures, don't worry, we got 911.
Yeah, we're good. I'll be good. DeliverFund, most importantly, and what you guys do there. There's a lot to talk about. So let's just get into it, man. I think the best place to start is generally your backstory, your background. Super interesting. You've done some really fascinating work around the world. So let's start with that, and then we'll get into all the other things and from there.
Yeah. Well, thanks. My quick backstory, people say I'm like Forrest Gump because I tend to just kind of fall into the coolest things despite, some, pretty traumatic backgrounds in very early childhood. So I was abandoned by my mom on an orphanage, literally on the orphanage steps when I was like 1.5, right before I was 2 years old. Had by the absolute grace of God, got adopted by the most wonderful family ever out of Wyoming, because back in the day when you went into adoption, they basically, it was like a wet sec for orphans, right? They doctored your birth certificates, everything. It's funny. You should see my birth certificate. You very clearly see where like somebody put a piece of tape over my real parents' name and then typed my parents, my adopted parents, who I consider my mom and dad, typed their name over the top of it and then like refotocopied it. Like you can see like the edges of the tape and everything. It's like, really, this is the best you can do, but that's my official birth certificate. So, I got adopted. Parents took me to Montana. A pretty uneventful, childhood. Living in Montana, you don't realize how amazing it is. In fact, when you grow up in Montana, kind of the thing you want to do is get out of Montana and go see the world. And you'll notice after seeing the world, I'm back in Montana. It's a pretty great place to go.
Pretty normal story, yeah.
Yeah. So I was kind of unremarkable in high school. I was into sports, but I wanted to ski, but my high school didn't have a ski team, and my parents couldn't really afford to send me skiing all the time. So I kind of figured out how to hack the attendance system at my high school so that it appeared on paper that I was there, but I was not there. Showed up to take tests. I could take tests relatively well. I was good enough to graduate. And I had decided about midway, I want to say it was maybe the summer of my junior year, that I wanted to go into the military. That's what I wanted to do. And so I originally wanted to be a medic in the SEAL teams, because you remember the movie Navy SEALs, Charlie Sheen, right, and all that. I mean, if you watched that movie as a red-blooded American male and you didn't want to go do that, there's something wrong with it. And so I decided, like, I'm gonna go be Charlie Sheen. I'm gonna go do that. And once I went to the Navy recruiter, I actually went to the Marine Corps recruiter, Army recruiter, and I was still like, I want to be a medic in the SEAL teams, but disappointed because the Navy could not guarantee me that I would be a medic. Like, no, you'll go in, you'll become a SEAL, and then you'll be whatever they want you to. And I really wanted to be a medic because I was a ski patroller in high school. Another funny story. So I thought I really liked the trauma medicine piece, and the Air Force recruiter saw me walking out one day and was like, hey, why don't you come check this out? I'm like, I got chair force? Like, what's a chair force got to offer me? I don't want to go fly jets. And he was like, well, we got this thing called pararescue. And I'm not really interested in it. And kind of wouldn't really give him the time and walked out. And a couple of days later, I was back to kind of continue talking to the Navy recruiter and going through that process. And he hit me up again and was like, are you sure you don't want to at least come check out the pararescue program? And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I want to do. And then he said the smartest thing that probably any military recruiter's ever said. He said, yeah, you probably wouldn't make it anyway. Excuse me? And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, it's, statistically it's a harder program and, it requires higher ASVAB scores and all this stuff. And he's like, you probably wouldn't make it anyway. So like, never. And I was in his office for the next 3 hours watching, the cool recruiting videos and all that stuff. And then I went home and I hadn't really told my parents that I was really actively pursuing this route yet. And then I got home, and that night my mom had brought home a pamphlet for Air Force pararescue that she had seen. You know, the back in the day in the malls, you had the like brochure thing that was at like, you know, by the doorways and stuff.
So she randomly brought that home.
Yeah, so she brought that one home, and she'd been looking through them and said, "Hey, like I saw this one. This thing in the Air Force. Like it seems like something you'd really like." And I distinctly remember the pamphlet, and any PJs listen to this will know what I'm talking about, because on the cover of the pamphlet was Mike Maltz, literally the poster child for pararescue. He's this like huge dude, big square jaw, right? Beret all perfect on his head. He ended up being my supervisor. He was actually my first supervisor when I graduated pararescue school and went to the teams. And so I decided I was going to go do that. Enlisted. Wasn't the most popular decision around the kitchen table, but at the same time, because back then, I think people viewed the military as like, well, if you went into the military, it was because it was like that or prison, right? Most people didn't really look at the military as a viable option of something that you would do. They didn't have a lot of, you know, parents who'd been in the military, a lot of grandparents who'd been in the military, but that was obviously, you know, World War I or World War II in Korea and all that. And so, but at the same time, my parents were very supportive and like, well, if that's what you're going to go do, go do it. And so I became an Air Force pararescueman, did a decade in the pararescue teams. And then I left, did about a year and a half in some startups out of Boston and New York. And then primarily working in the kind of private equity space, and then got recruited into the Central Intelligence Agency. And I spent a number of years at the CIA, ultimately culminating as the country team leader for a nuclear armed Islamic country. Can't say the name of the country. That's not hard to Google though. And so, did that, and then left and started DeliverFund, started a tech company doing investment due diligence. And now I've got a number of companies that I'm either an advisor to, an investor in, or I'm running. And one of those is one of the GoPills.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
How does one get recruited to the CIA? In my imagination, I'm thinking a very clandestine process, right? Like they're watching you for a while, right? Maybe they reach out to you, or is it just like you get something in the mail or you get a phone call? Like how is that process of being recruited for the CIA itself? So
have you seen The Bourne Identity?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's exactly nothing like that. It was interesting though. It was my in-laws got a call looking for me because that was the last kind of phone number of record that I had that I'd put down on some government paperwork when I got out of the military. And that's kind of what started the whole thing. It was like, hey, got a phone call looking for Nic McKinley. Please have him call us back. Obviously didn't say who they were. Back then, my phone didn't blow up near as much as it does now. And so I actually returned phone calls and actually answered my voicemail. And so I called them back, and they're like, can't tell you who this is, but what we can tell you is we're with the federal government, and there's a program that we would like you to consider trying out for, and we can't tell you what that is. You get that phone call, the answer is always yes. I mean, I don't care what it is, right? The answer is yes. And so I said, awesome. Like, what? Yes, I'm willing to go check that out. And they sent me a plane ticket, sent me to a very nondescript location in Virginia, and the rest is history.
Yeah. You know, I want to talk about the PJs too, because you and I had a cup of coffee, and you're not the first person to hear this from. Like the training for that team is ridiculous. Like what made that so difficult? Why is it different than some of, you know, maybe the SEALs or the Rangers or some of these other, you know, special forces and programs out there? Like what makes it so unique?
So let's set the record straight in that the way a lot of people will hear that is that, you know, PJs are the best, PJs are better than everybody else or something like that. None of that is true. The reality is that somebody who made a good special operator in one branch of the military would make a good special operator in the other branch of the military. What does separate primarily Marine, so used to be called MARSOC, I think they call them Raiders now, but the Marine Raiders, Air Force Pararescue and Combat Control, and then the Navy SEAL teams is that they're water-based selections. And so water is what I like to call water the great equalizer. And I'm sure I'm not the one who came up with that. I probably stole that from somebody somewhere. But the reason water is the great equalizer is because it's like, oh, if you're a really fast runner, that's great, get in the pool. Oh, you're really smart, get in the pool. Oh, you're very strong, great, get in the pool, right? I mean, you start taking away breath from human beings, and all human beings react in pretty much the same way, give or take about 10%. And so when you're looking to select people for their ability to keep their minds under control, water-based selection processes are the best way to do that, and dive-based selection processes. And it's also when you're talking about training, dive training will kill you just as fast as real-world operations on dives, right? It doesn't. I mean, I would say I have more friends who died in training over the years than I had friends who died in combat over the years. I mean, training is usually in the special operations community is much more dangerous than combat. The only difference is you're on a one-way range and not a two-way range. But the consequences of a parachute that fails, as an example, and a halo jump, on a training halo jump, are exactly the same as if the parachute fails on the real-world jump or the rope fails on the cliff, right? It doesn't really matter. And so every time you do those things, it's pretty high consequence. The dive stuff is high consequence because you, obviously, if you're underwater, you don't have the ability to breathe. You've got to fix that problem, and you've got to do that very quickly. And that's where the water-based selection processes tend to weed out more people than the land-only selection processes. That's really all it comes down to. And then the other thing I think that, so that doesn't make pararescue unique, right? That pararescue selection is the same as BUDS, is the same as the Marine Raiders, with different ways of doing things, but at the end of the day, you're getting pretty much the same outcome. One of the things that makes pararescue interesting is that on the dive school side, so I went to the Army's Special Forces Underwater Operations School called SWUFO, down in Key West, Florida. And so that's the hardest school the United States Army has to offer this, right, statistically. So I went with Rangers and SF guys and a couple of CAG dudes. And in that school, the Rangers who failed out went back to the Ranger Battalion. The SF guys who failed out went back to their ODA. The PJ students and combat control students who failed out were like driving buses for the Air Force or whatever it was they made them do. They made them be cops for the Air Force or something like that, right? You didn't get to progress with the career field. So that's, I think, one unique piece. The other unique piece is the medical training is academically incredibly intense, and the academics, they don't get as many people as the selection process does, because that's the whole point of the selection process. But the academics are relatively rigorous. And so we have people who are very strong and very fast and can keep their heads about them, but they just couldn't handle the academics. And so that is, I think, one of the things that makes pararescue unique, is that there's really no place to put somebody who's a really good dude and very strong and very fast, but couldn't quite handle the academic side. It was either got it all or you've got it.
Yeah. It's always interesting to me to hear this stuff, because I think obviously Navy SEALs get a lot of shine nowadays.
Sure.
Right. Over the last 10 years.
Deservedly
and
so.
Deserve it.
Great,
but I also like
programs.
Hearing about the other side, Jason McCarthy from Goat Rock. He was an Army Ranger on this show, and we talked about that. So I think it's really, it's a fascinating thing. It's really captured a lot of people's imaginations into how difficult these things are and who's going through this to put themselves out there on the front lines. It's just an interesting topic. And I think there's a little bit of every guy out there who's like, yeah, I could have done that. Right?
I'm sure there is. You'd be surprised at the people who make it. And you'd probably be even more surprised at the people who don't, right? Mm-hmm. My roommate in selection was a junior Olympic swimmer, right? So I had a pool in my backyard growing up, swam at the lakes a little, but that was about it, right? I was a very sloppy swimmer, still am, quite frankly. So when we were doing underwaters, like 50-meter underwater, this guy's getting across the pool in like 6 strokes. And 30 strokes, right? I'm just like trying to get over there as fast as I can, right? Just sloppy, ugly swimming.
Inefficient.
Yeah,
Inefficient.
very inefficient swimming.
Yeah.
A lot more movement than progress, I'm sure. And yet he didn't make it. He failed out, and I did. So what's the difference there? I have no idea. That guy was smarter, faster, and stronger than I could probably ever even hope to be. Well, definitely more talented than I could ever hope to be. And yet I made it. Yeah, it's interesting. SOCOM has spent a lot of money doing everything from genetic testing to, blood tests to childhood backgrounds and psychological evaluations and everything, trying to shorten the selection process. Because what they really would like is to basically give candidates a blood test and be like, okay, you're good and you're not.
Yeah.
They would really like to get to that. So would the CIA, quite frankly. And they've never been able to find a common denominator between the people who don't make it and the people who do make it. Really what it comes down to, just like it does in entrepreneurship, is grit. And how do you quantify that? You kind of can't.
You can't.
And so
you have to find out.
Yeah.
You just have to find out, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to cover, and all that stuff's super interesting, and I want to get into GoPills next. But I want to preface by saying, a lot of this is due to what you do at DeliverFund and a lot of other things, and the battle against human trafficking. I think that's something where I hope listeners take one thing from this is like somehow get involved in this, like take a little bit of action today, because I think what you're going to hear from you and, the research, if they hopefully pick up their phones and do a little searching, like it's very compelling. It's a huge problem. So starting with GoPills, Nick, like what was the impetus for starting it? I'm looking at it now, it's military nootropics, fairly familiar with nootropics. I think a lot of people here who listen are, but give us some insights, like why this type of company, why type of this type of product?
Yeah. And I think most of your listeners are probably very familiar with nootropics because the bodybuilder and fitness community were really the first to start mass adopting like huperzine A as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was in like stacks going back to the 70s. The paracetam family of drugs, right? And phenylparacetam became outlawed by the International Olympic Committee because it worked so well, right? Because the athletes in the fitness community were the first one grabbing onto it. And a lot of your listeners are probably like me. You're probably a lot like me, where if you told me that if I went and licked the oil spot in the middle of the road, it was going to give me a 3% increase in capability, like I'd be out there like, licking the oil spot on the road. Like, really? Like, you got some data to back that up? Screw it. I'll try it. Right.
I'll do the data later. Yeah.
I'll be the data. I am the data. And so that's, I think the fitness community will really, understand kind of the nootropic piece, but we've always looked at nootropics around physical performance, right? What makes me faster and stronger? Right? What makes me have more endurance? And I really got into that, like you said, in the pararescue teams. You got to keep in mind that once you go through selection, you go through training, and you get you're part of the teams, right? You go into whatever the next phase is, but you're now that thing. You're a pararescueman, a combat controller, a Navy SEAL, a MARSOC Raider, right? Whatever it is that you're doing. You made it there and you got your team. Well, congratulations. You're now at 0. That's what people don't understand. Like I know a guy who is a Navy SEAL who never deployed to combat during the longest war in the history of our country. I'm like, okay, so you're a Navy SEAL. Like, who cares? It's what did you do from there? And so I got to my PJ teams, and then you're constantly essentially being assessed and being kind of like, think of it as like continually being selected, right? You perform well and you're going to get the cool deployments. You don't perform well and you're going to get stuck in Spain, as like a tertiary force. And so, or you're going to have to go to the Philippines when everybody else is going to Iraq or something like that. So you have this kind of constant internal competition, and it's very healthy and it's very good. Does it get taken too far sometimes? Sure. But for the most part, it's a good internal healthy competition. And so you're always looking for kind of the leg up, like what's going to help me. And the thing that I never really had to rely on was talent. I will outwork you, but I do not have the talent, right? And it's funny, a friend of mine So the best out of the box shooter you'd ever meet. And another friend of mine was a like off the couch sub 6 minute miler for as many as you wanted him to do, right, in a
Those
row.
guys. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would train hard to outshoot Mike. I would train hard to outrun Justin. And when I beat them, I'd be like, yes. Now, the difference, though, is that had they put in 10% as much training as I did, they would have smoked me. I had to work for 6 months to be able to beat them at a thing that they were doing in like a lackadaisical way. And that's just the reality of it. Everybody's good at something. Everybody's bad at something. The question is, what are you doing to kind of improve? And that's, like I think most people in the fitness industry, it starts with, how can I make my muscles bigger and stronger? And then you realize that it's really hard to climb a rope ladder into a helicopter that's hovering off the side of a building when you're 220 pounds. Yeah, you got a great deadlift, but you might fall off this helicopter and die. So like, let's make better choices. And eventually that evolution goes to, oh, wait a minute. It's actually all in the mind, which is ironic considering that you learn that in selection, that it's mainly in your head, and then to come full circle that it's mainly in your head. So that's kind of the impetus. And then the military has been trying to create super soldiers, especially the special ops community, as long as I can remember. And not to the level that the Russians do it, where they like literally experiment with people and kill them, but the use of, sleeping aids and cognitive aids like, racetams in the early days, and then modafinils and all those different drugs. Like the military was at the forefront of like, okay, let's feed these to the troops to make them more lethal, because that's at the end of the day, that's the military's job, right? Is to maximize lethality. And so if you can do that in a F-16, you can do that in a human. Now we're starting to see some problems with that, but that's where GoPills came in, right? So GoPills originally were amphetamines, and then it kind of went into the modafinils, and then it became a combination of modafinil and amphetamines. And so you could take these pills that would essentially turn you into a robot, or you could operate for 2 days straight and be no problem. And you just felt amazing. Turns out there's some very significant side effects that we're now starting to deal with. So the whole concept of GoPills was, how do we take the good side of that, the hypercognition side, right, which translates into physical performance, but how do we create that in a way that doesn't have the same side effects? And so that's where Christian D'Andrea and his brother, who are really the brains behind the formulation, got together. And they were doing performance nutrition for the Army and special ops units and things like that beforehand. And they got together and said, okay, how we think we can do better than what Big Pharma is doing. And that's what led to GoPills. And so I got involved when they were, first kind of cooking it up, and they're like, okay, we think we've got something here. And I'd been in the nootropic space for 15 years. I mean, I have created more headaches for myself with the different drugs that I've taken and experimenting with different stacks. And so they started talking to me, and I said, oh, I have a stack that I use. And I gave them kind of my recipe for the stack. And they were like, wow, this is very close to what we're coming up with. And so anyway, that's how we ended up with GoPills.
Yeah. Amazing. And so the military leans on these, and you guys are...
So the military doesn't lean on these. We just, the amphetamines that the military was using, we referred to them internally as GoPills. So there was GoPills, and then you had like Ambien CR, which was your no-go pill, or Restoril back in the day before Ambien, right? That was your no-go pill. That's just, again, military meatheads. We gotta simplify things. Like this is green, this is red. I go here, I stop here. Yeah. And so that's why we created the brand around GoPills, is to kind of harness the best of what it was that the special operations community was trying to do. And it's not just the special ops community, it's also the aviation community. Because if you're flying an F-22 across the Atlantic, best not to fall asleep and lose focus.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So
who's the target market for this? I know you guys are getting out there now, making a big push. Like who are you guys looking at? Who do you think is going to be the biggest adopters of GoPills as a market?
So the target market is preferably human beings who have functioning brains. That's really it. It's very interesting. One of the biggest adopters of GoPills that we, quite frankly, didn't expect, right? I thought it would be a bunch of guys like you and a bunch of people like me and a bunch of, CrossFit maniacs, Jim Jones maniacs and all that. No, it's a lot of moms with kids. Which
a lot of sense.
Anybody who knows a mom with kids is like, oh, that makes lots of sense. Yeah. And it's not moms with kids taking them in the morning. It's moms with kids taking them at 2 p.m.
Yeah.
Because it literally makes them better people. They have more patience. They have more energy. They can be more present with their kids. They're not so exhausted.
And so give me some insights into the science. I was looking at the website and you guys have a really good breakdown, right, at gopills.com.
Yeah.
But yeah, from what you can, I know you're not technically a scientist, but you've obviously done a lot of work on this stuff. So give us some insights. Like what are some of the compounds that you guys are working? Is it the mixture of the thing, the ingredients in themselves individually? Like how'd you get to this formulation?
So it's really what we call it's the combogenics or comogenics of the different chemicals that are part of the ingredients, right? So a great example is like if you can take caffeine, most widely used mind-altering drug on the planet, and there are side effects to caffeine. However, you can enhance the effectiveness of caffeine and reduce the side effects by stacking a little bit of L-theanine. L-theanine by itself is helpful. Caffeine by itself is helpful, but this isn't something where, 1 and 1 make 2. This is where like 1 and 1 make 4, right? So that it's really the combination of it. But just to kind of set the context, I think one of the things that we should probably do like quick neuroscience refresher for your audience, right? Yes. So if we think about the human brain, and again, it's not just the brain. Most things originate from the brain. However, this applies to your muscles. This applies to really anything where there is a signal that's being transmitted in your body, right? And those signals primarily are transmitted through neurons. There are about 86 billion neurons in the average human brain. Just think about that. Like we're talking, this is massive data, right? I have a data company where we're harvesting data to the tune of about 200,000 unique images a day, about 65 million points of interest a month. That is not even rounding errors compared to the number of neurons that are just in our brains as we speak right now, right? So 86 billion roughly neurons. And then at the ends of those neurons, we've got basically axon terminals, right? So basically, for the way to think, people can think about that as that's the transmission antenna from one neuron to another, right? And so when those come together, you've got really thousands of trillions of those connections, right, that we call synapses, which is where essentially one connects with the other. Now, within a neuron, right, and some neurons are long and some are short, but within a neuron, the neuron transmits an electrical signal, we call an action potential. That electrical signal hits that axon terminal at the end and converts to a chemical signal. Lots of different chemicals involved there, but we primarily refer to those as neurotransmitters, right? Where it then pushes that signal to the next neuron, which converts it to an electrical signal. And so the sequence goes. So 86 billion synapses, trillions upon trillions of, 86 billion neurons, trillions upon trillions of synapses that rely on electrical signals to convert to chemical signals perfectly in order for you to think, breathe, and move. So when you have that kind of complexity, what are the chances that something go wrong? 100%, especially in the modern environment where you have all these like weird chemicals and we have seed oils and we have Wi-Fi and cell phones and radiation everywhere, brain trauma because we're doing things that we've never done before, right? The human body like probably wasn't designed to jump out of an airplane and have a parachute malfunction and like smack its head, right? I mean, that's just not the way that we're designed. So when you add all that together, the complexity, and then you take that complexity and you multiply it by the complications within our daily lives, you end up with some serious problems. And that's really why we created GoPills, was to stimulate that hypercognitive state by correcting for the chemical imbalances in neurotransmitters so that we can, think, breathe, move better in the way that we were meant to.
When I hear those numbers, Nick, sometimes I just write out 1 trillion in my notebook. And I look at the numbers, I'm like, it's bananas.
Yeah.
These are huge numbers. When you look at the marketplace for nootropics, I mean, there's Alpha Brain, there's Thesis, there's, it's starting to really pick up. Like, how do you set yourself apart in a marketplace like that?
So a way for people to think about GoPills is Alpha Brain with better science. And it's not to take away from Alpha Brain, right? Great product, pioneers, really doing amazing stuff. But this is version 2.0. You can stack this as basically a baseline nootropic. And we're eventually going to come out with a caffeine-free version for people who are caffeine sensitive, but you can, this is your foundational nootropic. So if you like, for the super nerds out there listening to this who understand what I'm about to say, if you really like your aniracetam and paracetam stack that you custom created, great. You can do that and take GoPills at the same time, right? And you have to experiment with it like you would anything else, but this is just kind of think of it as like the multivitamin for your brain, right? It's the thing that you take every single day. You might take other things on top of your multivitamin, but this is the baseline. And the combination of ingredients are meant so that you not only get that short-term potentiation, right? The like right now uptick in energy, clarity, you get the really the increase in focus, the decrease in anxiety, because anxiety is really just it's a signal that our body needs something, right? It's
like fatigue.
It's
right?
an entropy signal. Yeah.
Okay.
So when people experience anxiety, a lot of times it's because they're depleted in something that they need. Now, sometimes that can be emotional, right? It can have other effects. It can be environmental, but sometimes it's just like, hey, right? You need some creatine. I mean, to make the ATP work. I mean, it can be that simple. And so for GoPills, you get the immediate effects, but then there's also mid and long-term effects. So when you look at the different ingredients in GoPills, and we're really, really proud of the amount of neurochargers, which is what we refer to the ingredients as, that we stacked in here. And there's 1,425 milligrams dose. So anybody who understands anything about putting pills together knows that basically that means that there's no fillers in there. There's no sawdust. There's no cellulose. It is just the ingredients. So as you take these ingredients, again, you get the short term, but then there's also long-term benefits, right? So Copa Minori is a great example, right? There's peer-reviewed studies showing, and I'm talking like double-blind, placebo-controlled, peer-reviewed studies that show that Bacopa, which has been around for thousands of years, has roughly the same anxiety reducing effects as Xanax. And Xanax will melt your brain, and Bacopa actually makes your brain stronger and is actually more protective, right? Creatine is a great example, right? So people think of creatine as a supplement for bodybuilders, and it is, but it works first and foremost on the brain. Right. So the combination of lucidity, which is really leucine and tyrosine, right, and the way that it actually affects dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine production in your brain, all of those things come together to really make it so that your brain works better. And when your brain works better, you breathe better, you think better, right? Your muscles move better. All around just makes you a better human.
Yeah, amazing. I think for people listening to this, especially, the coaches, the practitioners, the gym operators and things like that. First and foremost, I mean, nootropics is a category overall that I think is super exciting. Right? And whenever you thinking like, oh, maybe I can start recommending this to my clients, but always start with yourself first. Talk to Andy Galpin about this the other day. Even if it's just something as simple as a wearable, like get yourself an Oura ring and start learning about the data. Like you are the experimental field. So yeah, I would urge people to go and check them out. And, I've tried a lot of different ones, and so far, I mean, even in this 30 minutes we've had this conversation, I feel pretty good, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel pretty good.
What a lot of people compare GoPills to is Adderall.
Yeah.
So you could think of it as a natural Adderall, but without the side effects. Now I'm not here saying that if somebody is prescribed Adderall for a specific purpose by their doctor, they should stop taking it and start taking GoPills. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Yep.
There are instances of that where we've had people contact us and say, hey, I've been able to drop my Adderall, right? So I did 30 combat deployments between special ops and the CIA. I did a total of 30, 14 in special ops and 16 at the Central Intelligence Agency. Wow. And so I've got some traumatic brain injury issues that I have to work through. Not all injuries from combat are things that you can see. Yeah, I've got scars from surgeries and stuff, but my biggest injuries are actually inside my head. What I can say is that personally, and I've got prescription drugs that I'm supposed to take for that, but I also have stage 3 chronic kidney disease from my time in the military and from all of those deployments. So unfortunately, the side effects of the brain drugs I'm supposed to take are kidney issues. Because really? So I've been able to significantly reduce my reliance on those traumatic brain injury drugs by taking GoPills. I take GoPills every morning. I usually take a half a dose in the morning. I take a full dose in the afternoon, and that works really well for me. Because I usually don't really energy or the clarity. Usually need it more towards the afternoon. The brain is smoked from a day of work and whatnot. So that's the way that I use it, and we've seen other people have similar experiences.
Yeah. So what's the term you use? Charitable funding mechanism.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
What GoPills is. So really excited to get into this topic. It's something that, I've been getting to know you guys here, what you guys are doing here in DeliverFund. My sister, as I told you, getting involved down in Monterey.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a transition house or?
Restoration home.
Restoration
for
home.
victims.
Yeah. Thank you. Terminology. But super impressive what you guys are doing with such a small team here in Whitefish, Montana. I think you said like over 600. You're working with other 600 departments across the country in law enforcement.
Right.
You're waging a huge battle that seemingly is unseen by most people. Mm-hmm. So tell us about DeliverFund, kind of the state of human trafficking and the fight against it. And just educate us a little bit. I think it's really critical.
So DeliverFund is a donor-built charity, right? And by that I mean that it's solely donor funds that go into us creating technology and data and intelligence products that protect society from human traffickers. And you said it goes unseen. You're right. But a couple of weeks ago, one of our embedded analysts, we have an analyst who's embedded in the Houston Police Department, and what people don't realize is that your police don't really fight human trafficking at scale. There's some incredible law enforcement officers who are doing their best, but when we look at the human trafficking problem, we have a drug enforcement agency. We spend double-digit billions of dollars a year fighting the war on drugs. How's that going? And 90% of drugs are legal. We have a Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. We're in Montana. You probably have alcohol, tobacco, and firearms all on your person right now. Right? Firearms are constitutionally protected, yet we have a Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms where we spend billions of dollars a year going after what is the illicit sale of those legal commodities. Same thing for the DEA. 100% of human slavery is illegal, and who's got the ball on that issue? Homeland Security does a little bit, and but when you look at budget comparisons for the few Homeland Security agents who fight human trafficking versus what the rest of them do, it's pennies. So where's our counter human trafficking agency? We don't have one. It largely falls to state and local law enforcement to do the heavy lifting in that. And most jurisdictions, they don't have the training. They don't have the data, the intelligence, or really understanding that it might be a problem within their area. And in Houston, like I said, that embedded analyst, it's an unseen, it's a crime that kind of happens behind closed doors, and unless you're participating in that market, you're not really going to see it. but 2 15-year-old victims were just rescued by law enforcement based on our data and intelligence products.
Nice.
So it's not unseen to them. And we have those operations going on across the country from as far south as, Houston, Texas, to as far north as Missoula, Montana, and kind of everywhere in between pretty much every day of the week. So that's really what we do at DeliverFund. And I think people expect way too much of law enforcement. And I was in the same boat coming from the CIA. I was like, man, I could get anything I wanted. And if I wanted it, I could literally send a cable asking for it and it would show up for the most part. And budgets were not anything anybody really talked about. It was just like you got the money you needed and it was never really a problem. And same thing when I was in pararescue teams. I mean, pararescue teams are some of the most highly funded teams in all of special ops. So it just never really thought about that. I just figured law enforcement was the same way, right? Like CSI Miami is a follow documentary. Like they just move a satellite, right? I mean, I did it at the CIA. Why can't they do it? And so that's when I realized the Sisyphean task that law enforcement in the United States has and what we expect of them and then how little resourcing we give them to do it. I think one of the best examples that people don't understand is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Everybody's aware, right? Kids on the milk carton and all that. Mm-hmm. Most people think that's a government agency. I thought that was a government agency when I worked for the government. It's a private nonprofit. Now, it's a congressionally mandated nonprofit at this point, but it is a private nonprofit that was started by John Walsh.
That's
so
wild.
Think about that. We don't even care enough about missing children in this country to have an agency that focuses on just that.
Do you have a theory on why that is?
Oh, yeah. I don't have a theory. I have
a
fact on why that is. Children don't vote. Politicians don't care. And to the politicians who want to push back on that, the very first thing and anybody who's politically connected who knows a politician, run this experiment. Go to that politician, say, hey, tell me about human trafficking. Like, do you care about it? And you'll have lots of wringing of hands and mashing of teeth, right? And lots of, oh, it's the most important thing. And we absolutely, it's my top priority. Great. Those are pretty words. Show me the budget line item on the legislation that you put forward for your state, for your county, for your city, for the nation that funds counter human trafficking activities. And that's when the room gets real quiet. Because if they honestly cared about that, they would be putting legislation forward. The reality is that, so every year, roughly 4,800 missing kids, this is based on National Center for Missing and Exploited Children data, roughly 4,800 kids are trafficked. Like these are missing children who then become trafficked, right? Only about 1 in 6 missing children become trafficked. Well, that's not a big enough constituency to swing an election anywhere. And who does it primarily happen to? And it's increasingly happening to the higher socioeconomic demographics. But in this country, we tend to talk a lot about like race and things like that. But the reality is the divide in our country doesn't really come down to race anymore. It comes down to socioeconomics.
100%.
And so now you do have racial populations who are disproportionately affected by those socioeconomics, but like one thing does not make the other. And when you look at the data around the socioeconomics and human trafficking, you find that the major majority of human trafficking victims come from socioeconomically depressed areas. Now that is starting to come to suburbia near you. And it's rapidly growing thanks to social media. But historically, the human trafficking victims have been from underrepresented areas, have been from socioeconomically depressed areas. So that's why it's literally that simple, right? You don't try to attribute to malice that which you can explain through stupidity. This is just politicians don't care because these are not people who swing votes. Look at the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue that we have across the West in the various massive expanses that we have our reservation system. If you had middle-class white girls going missing at the same rate that you have Native women and girls going missing, it would be a national outcry. It would be a national emergency. You would see the National Guard on every corner. But because it's Native girls going missing, most people don't even know that it's actually happened.
Yeah.
And so that's where, when I found out, and I found out about this because I was at the CIA and I was in a place that it's literally considered the most dangerous city in the world. And we had what I like to call smoking gun intel, a human trafficker. And when we looked at like, where do we put this intel, right? I just figured that surely there's a version of me and my team that's dealing with this human trafficking issue. We're dealing with counterterrorism, and we couldn't find a place. And so I started asking around. Lots of people in the fitness community. I knew lots of spies and operators. And so I started asking around, like, has anybody ever done a human trafficking operation? Anybody ever gone after a human trafficker? Could not find a single person, not even one, who'd ever had human trafficking primary mission. And then I started really nerding out, because at the end of the day, I'm a big of a nerd as anybody, and started looking at, congressional budgets and reading legislation and finding out there were lots of paper task forces. So there was a task force on paper. Up here in Montana, we have a paper task force, but there's no funding behind it. And they'll put $5,000 towards it, which, like, come on, you can't.
And what's a paper task force?
A paper task force is when they pass legislation saying we're going to have a human trafficking task force.
Okay.
But then they don't give it any funding, so there's no people that are focused on it. So it's a task force only on paper.
Got it.
Right? There's nobody actually doing the work. And so when I started realizing that, I thought, oh, okay, well, someone's got to do something about this. And my first thought was, I'll go to Homeland Security. I was a special agent at the CIA. I'll become a federal agent at Homeland Security. And so I started talking to Homeland Security, and they were like, yeah, dude, we love it. Come on over. And then I'd like to think my age caught up with me and my wisdom, because I was like, wait a minute, I'm going to be, even if I'm really good at the job, I'm going to be a small cog in a very, very large machine. And I know better. And I would actually be kind of taking a step down to think about it, because I would have more bureaucracy, less resources, I wouldn't have a presidential man anymore. And so I was like, man, there's got a better way. And that's when I ultimately kind of came up with the concept of DeliverFund. And here we are almost 10 years later. We started with one law enforcement detective that, quite frankly, I think the only reason he was working with me is because he really didn't have any other choices. It wasn't because I was some kind of like super genius or anything. He was like, well, I guess I'll give you a try. I mean, nothing else seems to work. And then once we started feeding him target packages on traffickers, he was like, oh, and he started getting, successful prosecutions. Then the prosecutor was like, hey, where are you getting this intel? And he's like, oh, well, let me introduce you to Nick. And then we started working with the prosecutor in the state, and then the attorney general's office in the state. And then now we have a waiting list for law enforcement that is wanting our help. We have embedded analysts, increasing our embedded analyst program around the country. And then now we got into building tech because we started buying other people's tech, which wasn't really purpose built, or if it was purpose built, it was done on a shoestring and it wasn't really professionalized. And so you need lots of data when you're fighting human trafficking, because that's the human trafficking marketplace is online. So you need lots of data. So next thing you know, we're building our own tech, and now we've got 2 supercomputers, getting ready to pull the trigger on a 3rd full-time engineering team. And we collect about, from the data we've been able to find and the math we've been able to do, we collect about 250,000 times more data the federal government does every year. And that's only growing.
How has the human trafficking problem, has it grown over the past few years? And I mean, you mentioned social media, but what are, like, give us a state of it, like how, like the last 10, 20 years, what's been happening and why?
So the way to think about this is, so I'm 46 years old, so pre-internet, right? Pre-internet childhood. So in my, when I was a kid, everybody knew that there was a creepy guy on the wrong side of town, and parents knew to keep their kid away from the creepy guy. And pretty much the only children that the creepy guy, that the pedophile, the predator, the human trafficker could prey upon were the disadvantaged kids that he could get his hands on, right? And I say he because it's primarily, the victims here are primarily women, not all women and girls, not all. It's a small subset of, unfortunately, very young boys. And we're talking about human trafficking in America, which is different than human trafficking in, say, the Philippines. And so that was kind of when I grew up, that was the thing, right? Creepy guy, wrong side of town, stay away from creepy guy. What the internet did was it gave the creepy guy access to every single child who has a smartphone. So the best data we have on this comes from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Again, you'll hear me continually just kind of cite them because they're really kind of the only data that exists on this issue. They found that in a 5-year period from 2010 to 2015, they had an 846% increase in suspected child trafficking cases. And when you overlay the adoption rates of the smartphone and then the Facebook app, which was the first social media app, what you see is almost a 1-to-1 correlation with the growth of suspected human trafficking cases when it comes to children. And that's just that 846% was just children. And so what we found is that tech, like everything, right? Tech makes it so that you and I can right now have this conversation in a way that is better, faster, and cheaper than Tom Brokaw could do it. And so we've democratized media. And that's a good thing. Like we very much as a society are all benefiting from that. But we've also democratized criminality, and we've democratized the ability for predators to enter the market, right? So if you think about, the economics of business and barriers to entry, the only thing that is required for you to become a human trafficker is a smartphone and with access to the internet. That's it. And you don't even have to pay for those because you can get the Obama phone for free, right? The free smartphones, and you can get on the free Wi-Fi at McDonald's or the public library or the wherever. So what technology did was it removed the barriers to entry for the bad guys to be able to enter the market. And that's what we realized. And so that's why we created DeliverFund as a platform to be able to disrupt that market, to make it so that we can actually fight back and start reducing human trafficking. And so far, it's been more successful than we ever could imagine.
Essentially what it's doing too is taking one predator and amplifying their ability to do damage, right?
For that predator, it's a numbers game. So like to make the math easy, let's just say that predator knows that they have to contact 100 young girls. So they go and they create that fake Instagram account or TikTok or Snapchat or whatever, right? Facebook even to an extent. They use gaming consoles, Xboxes, like anywhere the kids are, bad guy's going to be there. And that's the thing that parents really have to take away is if there is something that is meant for kids, you are 100% going to attract pedophiles and predators and traffickers. Like that is going to happen. It's not if, it's when. And so why do you think you see so many soccer coaches who turn out to be pedophiles or Boy Scout leaders or whatever? And that's not to say obviously all of them are. They're obviously not. But they're going to go where their targets are. And so if kids are playing Xbox, that's where they're going to be. If girls are on Snapchat, that's where they're going to be. If they're on Instagram, that's where they're going to be. And what's interesting about these social media apps is that they know that they get on and they have to say friend request 100 12-year-old girls. And that the median age of the human trafficking victims that we're talking about in females here, according to the National Center, is 12 to 14 years old. So we're not talking 17-year-old girls here, right? Or 18-year-old girls. We're talking 12-year-olds. So there's no question on whether or not these girls are too young. And they know that they've got to contact 100 of them, friend request them. It's that simple. What's their cost to do that? Near zero. Call it 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Then, because everybody wants to get their friends up, 50 of those girls will accept their request. And now the Instagram algorithms, the Snapchat algorithms, they do the rest. Because how many times you've been on social media? I'm not a big social media user, but when I am on it, I do see like, oh, you might also know these people. Sometimes I actually do know those. I'm like, oh, that's my mom's best friend, right? But so now the algorithms take over. So the algorithms are basically their targeting platforms. So you can think of it as the phone is the weapon, but the algorithms within the social media apps, those are the sights on the weapon. And they literally serve up to these pedophiles, oh, you might also like all these girls and all these girls. And they just sit there and just click, yep, yep, yep. And so they contact 100, 50 agree to connect with them. 25 agree to have a conversation. 10 agree to have a meaningful conversation. 5 do something that they regret, send in something like that, right? 2 agree to meet with them. 1 actually shows up. So they can have a 99% failure rate in talking to children, and that one child is worth $94,000 a year in tax-free money. That's the economics of it. That's why we've seen such a growth. But our system fights back against that at scale. So in the jurisdictions where we've been largely successful in, we come in, they have a huge human trafficking problem. We equip them, we train them, we advise them, all for free, thanks to the generosity of our donors. And then the next thing you know, 18, 24 months later, they're having a hard time finding a human trafficker in their jurisdiction.
That, I guess that's, that kind of addresses my next question, which was going to be, it's so pervasive, it's so massive of a problem. What's the realistic goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
To DeliverFund? Is it to completely eradicate, or is it to like get down to a certain percentage? Like what?
So the best analogy here is organized crime.
Yeah.
The mafia still exists in tiny, tiny little amounts as compared to the 1970s and 1980s. So can we eradicate human trafficking? No, because we'd have to change the hearts of men, and like that ain't happening this side of heaven. But what we can do is we can introduce so much friction and risk into the market that we make it so that it's extremely difficult to make money as a human trafficker, which means that most of those human traffickers are going to self-select into other industries. They're probably not going to go good, but they'll go sell drugs, guns, boost cars, whatever, and they'll get caught for that. And so we reduce the numbers down to an amount that becomes manageable for law enforcement. And the way that this works is, I want you to imagine a commerce chain, right? So you're a businessman, and probably most of your listeners are, and you have to source, well, one, you've got to have a business, and then you have to source customers, and then you have to, you have to advertise, and you've got to provide services and take payments, and you've got to do banking, and you've got to do regulatory compliance, right? And when you map out the commerce chain, you find that there's actually 10 points of connection between you and a customer, you and something else, be it the banking industry or transportation or something like that. So it's no different for human traffickers, right? Commerce chains and value chains are what they are. So right now, what happens is, imagine the human trafficker is running a 100-yard dash, and we have one hurdle at the end of that 100-yard dash, and that's law enforcement. That's regulatory, right? That's the regulatory compliance. And that hurdle is at 3% height. That's it. Let's even make it 5% height. That means that runner has a 95% chance of completing that sprint without tripping over a hurdle. Another way to say that is that human trafficker has a 95% chance of successfully completing a human trafficking operation and making money without getting caught by law enforcement. Oof. Pretty good odds for the trafficker, right? If that was a for-profit company, you'd invest in that. Now, let's imagine that we add hurdle at every point of transaction, right? And at a point of transaction, I refer to that as a point of disruption, because it's an opportunity to disrupt that operation. So if we add a hurdle at every point of transaction, and we randomly assign heights between 5 and 20%, right? That's it, right? You think about it, 20% efficacy is kind of failure, right? Like, oh, hey, you're going to be a coach, but you're only going to be 20% effective at making your athlete better, right?
Point taken, yeah.
You've failed. But we're only going to shoot for 5 to 20% efficacy. Well, what happens then over the course of that 100 yards is you just made it so that sprinter has a 96.4% chance of tripping over a hurdle. So you took the odds from 95% chance of completion to a 3 3.6% chance of completion.
Not bad, Nick.
Right?
Yeah.
Public math, man. Whew.
Yeah.
I'm done.
I wasn't going to do it. Yeah.
It's the GoPills. So that's our strategy.
Yeah.
We introduce risk and friction through the combination of tech and data, and then training and intelligence to law enforcement in a way that introduces so much friction and risk that the human trafficker just can't be successful. And so, like in the jurisdictions where we have been working, we see them move to other areas, or we see them get out of it altogether and go to something that doesn't have so much friction, doesn't have so much risk. And the Achilles heel to the human trafficker is they have to advertise. Right? You can't have a successful podcast if you don't advertise. A gym owner can't have a successful gym. They don't advertise, right? Just nondescript building, doors, no sign outside. Be like, oh, it's a cover for the CIA. So they have to advertise.
Yeah.
And that's the Achilles heel of human traffickers in the modern era, is they have to advertise. And this is not the dark web. That's a total myth. I mean, is there human trafficking on the dark web? Yes, but it's very, very, very small compared to the human trafficking that happens on the front-facing internet, because that's where the customers are. And so we collect that data at a massive scale, and then we use our own proprietary AI to make sense of it. And so, in fact, one of our analysts right now is actually finishing the final touches on our second data training model, and it's to our knowledge the only human curated training model for AI to detect human trafficking on the planet. And that's why DeliverFund is a nonprofit. It's not that Boeing couldn't do this, or Amazon couldn't do this, or Google couldn't do this. Of course they could. I mean, they can pile $1 billion in cash in the parking lot and set it on fire, and it won't even affect their stock price. It's not that they can't. It's that they don't have any incentive to. There's no bucket of money to fund the counter human trafficking fight. And so that's why DeliverFund is a nonprofit. And that's why every company I have contributes to DeliverFund, and GoPills is no different, right? So GoPills, a percentage of our profits goes not only to help with research around traumatic brain injury and health issues as they pertain to our special operations community, but a percentage of our proceeds also go to DeliverFund to help keep that keep that funded and keep that going. And that's why I called GoPills or 10 Point Data or Glacier Data Centers or any of that are all charitable funding.
Yeah, I love it. And so I guess a couple questions just to wrap this up with you, Nick, is, people can buy some GoPills.
Mm-hmm.
They can
GoPills.com.
Yeah, be a seller.
Yeah, you got a gym.
GoPills.
We have great deals right now because we're just going to market.
Yep.
Those aren't going to last forever. But those deals will last for you and your relationship with us forever. So if you're a gym owner and you like GoPills and you want to recommend them, we've got private doctors. We've got a number of folks who are carrying them on the retail space. That's great. Podcaster, and you want a code for GoPills, like we can do that.
Cool.
There's lots of different ways that we're distributing this. And one of the things I think is really important too is that GoPills has not to date taken a single dollar of investment. The two founders, I'm just kind of lucky to get to be on the ride, quite frankly. They're the geniuses, and they have bootstrapped GoPills so that the cap table doesn't get diluted. So there's more money to put into the charities that we all care about.
So two things. What is one or two simple things that somebody today can do to help fight human trafficking?
Great.
Right? And
yeah.
then after that, how can we help you, Nick, and Morgan and the team at DeliverFund? Yeah, how can we help you? So two questions to wrap it up.
Two questions. So first, fathers. Be good fathers to your daughters. That most human trafficking victims that we talk to, there's a father wound. It's not, as with females, it's not as much the mother wound. It's the father wound, right? So be a good dad. Do your best to be a good dad. Parents, make sure that you have conversations with your kids around things like sextortion. There's literally a movie on it. Highly recommend you watch it. It's called Sextortion.
Okay.
If you're somebody who partakes in the pornography industry, read the book Takedown, and you'll find that the people on the other end of that screen are probably not willing participants that you think that they are. if you engage in the commercial sex market, you've done it more than 3 times, 100% chance that you have fed money into the human trafficking cycle, and you are literally abusing human trafficking victims. So think about your personal choices, but also be a safe place for your kids, and make sure you have conversations with your kids so that when they send that image that they really wish they hadn't sent, or when they do the thing that they wish they hadn't done, they feel safe to come to you, and you'll help them solve that problem. You're not going to, get angry with them for making mistakes, because thank God cell phones and cameras and stuff didn't exist when I was a kid. I mean, some of the things I did as a teenager will die with me.
Yeah, right.
I guess it's the same for you.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the first thing is be a good dad. Be a good mom. Do your best to be good parents. And for those who don't have parents, which that was the road that I started on, be a good teacher, be a good principal, be a good mentor, be the person that you wish you had had. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is to get trained and use the resources around you. So at DeliverFund, we tried to solve this problem by, we actually have training on our website. So just go to deliverfund.org. That's deliver, DELIVER, fund.org. And you can go there and you can get training. And that's training that if you actually take the certificate program, you literally can give that to your HR and it'll check your human trafficking compliance box.
Wow.
So we try to make it as simple as we can. And then we have an app called HT Safeguard. And what that app does is it gives a very limited access to some of our data. So let's just say that, I don't know, a 16-year-old girl chatting with some boy online or however it works these days. And he says on Instagram, and he says, oh, hit me up on WhatsApp at this number because WhatsApp is encrypted. And she takes that number and puts it through our app. If it's connected to a commercial sex advertisement, it'll come back with a red flag that says, hey, this has potential connections to human trafficking. So that app is a early warning indicator. Now, what are the chances that that number comes back to that app? Probably less than 1%. What are the consequences if it does? And she continues to engage in that conversation, life altering. So this is something where the chances of becoming a victim of human trafficking are very small, but the consequences almost can't be corrected for. So that's what we're doing our best to try to bring as many tools directly to the public, because my mission is not to end human trafficking. Because I'm not that arrogant to think that I, Nic McKinley, am going to be able to do that, right? That's not my mission. My mission is to empower everybody else to fight human trafficking and to fight against predators and to make this world a better place. And so that's why we create these tools to make it easy for people to be able to take the fight into their own hands and participate. And then the other way is if you have resources, and that can be as little as $5 a month, please consider donating. Amazon Web Services doesn't give us a deal on any of our servers, just like any other company. And so none of this would exist if it wasn't for the generosity of donors. And so if you got a gym, January's Human Trafficking Awareness Month, great. Do some type of workout competition for DeliverFund. We have in October, somebody's doing a shooting competition. I think it's North Carolina or South Carolina, with the proceeds going to DeliverFund. So yes, please get involved financially because we help. Yeah.
And it was HT Safeguard.
HT Safeguard.
Okay.
Or if you go to the App Store or Google Play Store and just search DeliverFund, it'll come up there as well.
Right on. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of communities within the fitness industry. I mean, Don Fall, CrossFit, talking to you. Brandon Cullen, Metabolic, talking to you. There's a lot of ways to get involved. In January, I think it would be really worthwhile to build communities around that awareness and that kind of fundraising. So I lied. Last question. People want to get a hold of you, Nic. Where do you want them to go?
So the best place to go is nicmckinley.com.
Yeah.
It's my kind of catch-all website. There's links to DeliverFund, GoPills, other projects there as well. If you want to know more about my background and whatnot, it's all there. If you want a picture from media, it's all there. Download what you want. make funny memes, please. I love it when that happens because they're usually pretty funny. And then you can find me on Instagram at the.nic.mckinley and Twitter, and I don't actually engage in Twitter, so don't waste your time. But LinkedIn and Instagram are really the only two that I pay attention to, and both of those are at the Nic McKinley.
Awesome. And there's a podcast too. Plenty of stuff to go around.
Yeah. Lots of podcasts to go around, lots of media. It's all there. So I really appreciate you, one, helping us to kind of spread the word of what we're doing at GoPills, which will help a lot of people, but then also at DeliverFund, which is obviously extremely important.
Yeah, no, thank you, Nic. I appreciate everything you do and sitting down for however long it's been. You're usually fighting evil, and it took an hour to sit down with me, so I really appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Thanks.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Nic McKinley.